Hi, I'm Chris McBrien, a Gen Xer, and the pop culture from my generation is awesome.
And I'm Yancy Eaton, a millennial, and the pop culture from my generation is dope.
Episode 56, Films versus Movies. Chris McBrien here. This is Pop Goes Your World with Yancy Eaton. As always, you can find us on Twitter at CMcBrien or at Yancy Eaton. You know, shoot us a tweet. We answer back, and we love talking pop culture, especially movies and TV shows. That's for sure. Yancy, what's going on today, brother?
Not a whole lot. Just incrementally, my life is improving with each passing week.
Good.
The house is coming together. Work's coming together slowly. You know, we're still not open to the public, but the store is looking pretty good. And I just binged the hell out of Stranger Things season 2, and it was pretty good. So I'm actually really excited about that. Maybe we can get somebody on in the future. Maybe like our old buddy Nathan Dock, and we'll want to come on. I haven't talked to him yet, but I'm pretty sure he'd be down. But
he would love to come on.
There's still a ton of movies I want to see and stuff that I haven't got a chance to yet. Still haven't seen Blade Runner, which is like really, really disappointing to me. But yeah, other than that, everything's good.
Oh, that's good. So the other week we were talking, and I mentioned this idea, this concept that I came kind of threw on you, and you were like, hey, I never really thought of that. And I was kind of discussing the idea of how there's movies and then there's quote unquote films. And you kind of thought, oh, that's kind of an interesting topic. I never really thought of it like that before. So then we got talking and we said, hey, you know, we got to do a show on this. So here we are, lo and behold, doing a show on this. And I decided to reach out to our good old buddy, caveman himself, Derek Myers. And he said, of course, I will come and join the conversation. This sounds like a great topic. So he is joining us this week. Derek, welcome back to the show, bud.
Thanks, Chris. Pleasure to be back. Thanks for having me again. And definitely geared up to talk about this particular topic.
Yeah. So you guys ready? Anything going on in your life you just want to throw out there quickly? Doing anything exciting?
Well, to echo Yancy, we binge watched Stranger Things season 2 last weekend, and it every bit lived up to my very unrealistic expectations, so strongly recommend that. And got a chance to see Thor Ragnarok last night. And if you're into the comic book movies, this one was a home run. It was great. Loved every minute of it. Yeah, strongly recommend it. If you're into the Marvel movies, check this one out. You won't be disappointed.
As I kind of alluded to before we came on air here, but here's the thing for me. All these new movies, these comic book movies, there's just, I can't keep up with them. It's like an avalanche. There's like one after the other, and they all have these. It's not like, 2, 3, 4, 5. They just give them all different names and stuff, and they all kind of blend in together and all this. It's just, I just don't get it.
I agree, Chris. And also, not only that, but there's so many that are just not good, that are just, they're out there to make money, and they don't actually have any type of, artistic value to them whatsoever. So it's hard to discern between which ones are actually good movies that you want to go see, like a Dark Knight or Guardians of the Galaxy, versus, the Fantastic Fours or, what every other Spider-Man that's absolutely terrible. I've just decided, because I didn't grow up with comic books, I don't have like an emotional attachment to these franchises. I just wait till everybody tells me that it absolutely blows you away, and then I'll go see it. But for the most part, I just kind of sit it out.
Well, coming from the millennial, I guess that's something. Then that doesn't make me the old man that's yelling, hey, get off my lawn, right? I'm not that guy.
No, that's still your MO, Chris.
Oh, okay, that's okay. My wife took me out a little while ago. We went to see Who's Live. So it's called Who's Live Anyway. And so, the show Whose Line Is It Anyway? They've got this tour, and they go around. It's called Who's Live Anyway. And my wife took me to that for my birthday, and it was fantastic. We went down to Hamilton, and it was Ryan Stiles and Jeff Davis, and Greg Proops was supposed to be there. But Greg Proops had to go in for like emergency surgery or something like that, so they called Kathy Greenwood, and they got Kathy Greenwood to come over, and so she kind of filled in. It was great. I love watching improv. I've always done improv. Derek, did you ever remember when I used to do that improv show with Rob? Did you ever come and see that? I'm trying to remember.
No, I remember hearing all about it, and two-person reenactment of the bits, but it sounded great. I never got a chance to see it live.
Anyway, it was a lot of fun. I really like improv, so that was really great. But anyway, films versus movies. You guys ready?
Absolutely.
Yep,
let's go. Phoebe Cates in the red bikini scene.
Jodie loves Chachis.
Gotta like it.
Didn't she die the same day as Michael Jackson?
But you did meet Fred Savage once.
Ben Savage.
Ben Savage. Because around here, Yancy is the baby-faced one, and I, of course, am the ladies' man.
I'm a huge fan of like that feathered look that the women of the 60s and 70s did with their hair.
Somewhere on your smartphone there, young man. You can look it up.
Is it still around?
It was the two Coreys. It was Corey Haim and Corey Feldman.
I actually felt really bad for the guy.
And I had the hugest crush on Susan Ursity.
Who are these people?
So as I mentioned the other week, I have always kind of viewed there to be two different entities when it comes to film, and that's there's films and then there's movies, and like I've always sort of thought that. And when I mentioned it, Yancy, you thought that was kind of an interesting concept, so you thought it'd be a good idea if we kind of flesh that out a little bit here. So so you said you never really thought of that before. Since we mentioned that, have you been able to give it any thought? Do you think there's any is there anything to this, or am I just not onto something?
Well, I don't know if you remember, Chris, but in a past show, I think it was where we did our favorite rap songs, or like our top 5 favorite rap songs. And at the top of the show, you preface it by saying, should we address the differences between what we consider rap music and what we consider hip hop? And in my mind, like I know that they're two different words, but I always kind of associate them as the same thing. If you look at my, like my music libraries, I always key everything as hip hop / rap because it's kind of interchangeable to me. Whenever you brought that up, that what is the difference between a film and a movie, I kind of realized that subconsciously, I guess I did make a distinction between the two of them where, a movie I thought of as one thing and a film as something completely different. I ended up doing a ton of research on this and actually went into the etymology of, the origins of these words and how they're used in different countries. And I got down this huge rabbit hole, which I don't think was kind of in the spirit of what we were trying to do for the show. I will say that as far as me personally, I do think there's a huge distinction between the two of them. And I'm more than willing to kind of just jump into it. But if you want to kick it back to Derek first, we can kind of explore this more.
Well, I felt I needed to reach out to Derek because Derek, like me, I remember when I used to live down in Toronto, and Derek and I would hang out. We were in sync in terms of we both loved movies. And so Derek, I reached out to you, and you were like, yeah, I got lots to talk about this. So just what's your sort of initial take on the fact that there's films and there's movies? I believe that there is.
Sure.
What do you think?
So one of the advantages of living in a big city like Toronto is we have the Toronto International Film Festival, which is a huge movie to do in September every year. And I've been going to the Toronto International Film Festival, or TIFF as we call it locally, since 1998. So I've been there 20 years. And that to me has really helped divide, in my mind, sort of what's the difference between a film, the kind of thing that would appear at a film festival, versus a movie, which to me always is more like something you would see in the theater, in the cinema. And I was trying to come up with like a definition, some way to easily quantify one over the other. And the best thing that I could come up with, and by all means, contradict me if you don't agree, is a movie will entertain you. A film will do more than entertain you. And I think at its most simplistic definition, that was for this week when I was doing my prep, that was sort of the framework I used.
I like that. I think that's good. Yancy, what do you think?
I agree. Obviously, we can go into a little bit more depth with that, but I kept bouncing back and forth because I would think of, this type of movie is definitely just a movie. And this is what I would classify as a film. But then I realized there are films that can be both movies and films at the same time. And so I started writing down almost like a pro and con list, but I just divide them up into columns. And I actually had bullet points of things of how I would define first a movie. I can rattle some off just really quickly. The first things that came to my mind, if I'm defining a quote unquote movie: big budget, massive promotion, blockbusters, action, sci-fi, romantic comedies, thrillers, any comedies, comic book movies, multi-movie franchises, big name actors. Oftentimes they come out in the summer. There's lots of explosions. There's spoilers. There's plot twists. It's movies that you would take your date to and feel comfortable about it. That they would have a good time and that they would kind of enjoy the movie. Movies are the type of thing you'd see people pre-ordering tickets online for. Opening night, you'd see cosplay, people actually dressing up as the characters in the movies. Co-workers talk about it. There's multiple trailers, not just one release. And there's YouTube videos that people try to, use to analyze actual trailers. That to me is like a movie. That is a big time movie. Those are the things that I associate with it. Whereas with films, just as Derek said, the first thing I wrote down, it does more than just entertain. They're trying to say something. There's a lesson to be learned. It's often ambiguous. It's metaphorical, either historical. It's often critically acclaimed. And they're rarely box office hits. So these aren't the movies that you would take your date to see. And often it means very little to many who watch it. But some of these movies are transformative to a select few of people. And lastly, they're timeless and they age well. And they're often referenced in other forms of pop culture. And they're given homage in other films. So you see them constantly being derived into other films. And they're they become the canon as far as critical film theory. People are oftentimes using their works and other stuff. So that's a distinction between the two. But it does get murky because, I'm sure we'll talk about some films here soon where they kind of toe that line in both of these. Like, they check off all of these boxes. So what do you guys think?
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And I think that we will definitely go through some titles tonight that'll go through both. And we'll talk about that in a second. For me, I've always sort of, when I think about what constitutes a film, for me, a film is something that properly utilizes the medium. So for me, the medium is as important as the message. I sound like Marshall McLuhan when I say that.
Indeed, you do.
But you know what I mean? Like you're actually using the medium as part of the storytelling. And whereas a movie is just simply a vehicle for entertainment, just kind of like what you said, Cave. Like I agree with you. I think to me a movie is entertaining, but a film is more than that. Just I think is the simplest way that you put it. But for me, the extra piece is that a film utilizes the medium to some degree. Okay, and I think when we get into some examples tonight, that'll become a bit more clear. And so just speaking of that off the top, based on the definitions that you've given, then I'll put it back to you. We'll start with you, Derek. Give me an example of what would constitute a film. Do you have any examples of films, quote-unquote films, so we can better define it?
Very much like Yancy was saying, I basically did the two-column approach, listed a bunch, and I actually went to the Academy Award Oscar movies nominee lists from the last 25 years to get a sense of which movies on the list would I feel fell into the film category versus the movies category. And, based on the definitions we've used, I think we'll agree the vast majority of them tend to fall in the film category, but certainly not all of them. And I've got some that are clearly on one side or the other, and I've got a lot that tend to straddle the line or that you could easily make a good argument for one way or the other. But you were asking me examples of films. So I think, I believe Yancy said a minute ago, timelessness is a big one for me. And the idea of, I hadn't really thought about it, but it was a good point. The idea that it is referenced in other forms of pop culture. You see homages to it. You see other artists using it as an influence, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. So again, just going sort of down a couple on the list that I have as films, I have things like The Godfather or Silence of the Lambs. I would call a film rather than a movie, but again, could potentially make the argument for the other side of that. I'm going to throw out there one of my absolute favorites, Pulp Fiction. I would say Pulp Fiction is a film.
I agree with you. I agree.
Yeah.
Because if you go back, sorry to jump in, I would like to compliment what you're saying. And in Pulp Fiction, the thing is that Tarantino uses the medium, like to tell the story in such a way, like even just disjointed things he does. Now, this is something that if you didn't see the movie did you see the movie in the theater? I'm sure you did.
Many times.
Yeah, okay. So I did as well. Yeah. Yancy, you did not see the movie in the theater.
I did not.
Pretty much guarantee. So you've only ever seen it on DVD. Even when I watch it on DVD, there's still some aspects of the film that get cut off. Okay, and what I mean is there's, the scene when
exactly where you're
Travolta's
going.
character goes to the, he goes to the bedroom and he's shooting up and he's laying on the bed. Or sorry, he's standing there and Eric Stoltz's character is laying on the bed. Eric Stoltz's character, if you look in that scene, his head is cut off. It's on the left-hand side of the screen, but it's cut off. But on the right-hand part of the screen, by his feet, the closet door is open and there's a mirror. And his head's in the mirror. But on the DVD, that's all cut off. You don't see that for whatever reason. Just they didn't put it in. So there's Pulp Fiction. I agree with you 100%. And not only that, he uses the medium in that regard, but also he uses the medium in terms of the way he tells a story. Or the story. It's a non-linear type of storytelling, and so he's using the medium that way. You know what I mean? So I agree with you 100%. Pulp Fiction is a film.
Yeah, and Pulp Fiction's one that I think I'll come back to a few times during this conversation, but I think, again, it checks a lot of the boxes that Yancy talked about in that it was not an immediate critical success. It did not necessarily make a crazy butt ton of money when it came out in the theater. It definitely – I'm thinking back to your show you did a long time ago about cult films, and a lot of the definitions you used of what made a cult film, I would argue, are some of the same definitions we're going to say of what makes just a film in general. And I think Pulp Fiction, again, checks a lot of those boxes. It gained an audience when it was nominated for awards, and over time it has gained this following and it has become more and more popular, and it's constantly referenced. And but again, I would never classify it in the quote unquote movie. To me, a movie is almost a derogatory term that you would use, like a slang term for a film. Like the film is the avant-garde. This is what you aspire to be, and the movie is like, it's just a movie.
Yep. No, I agree. So do you think there's any, how about some, do you have any favorite films? Then if I had to list a couple of favorite films, what would they be? Well, Yancy, how about you? Do you have any favorite films? that we would call
I
quote
mentioned
unquote?
this last week when you first touched on the topic, but like I think of Schindler's List as like the epitome of a film, right? That's not something I would take my girlfriend to see, and it's not something I would play, for the family on a Friday night. But it's a really important film, something that, was critically acclaimed, and it stands the test of time where people are going to be watching that film 40, 50, 60 years down the road. I don't think it'll ever feel incredibly dated, mostly because the film's obviously all in black and white. Mine is Private Ryan, films like Vertigo, like you guys referenced The Godfather. I think that would be on the top 3 or 4 of almost every single person you ask of like the greatest films of all time. Gone with the Wind, stuff like that. But we are going to get into like the overlap that we talked about, where me personally, I think like The Matrix or Jaws. Jaws is something that you consider quote unquote a movie at the time, but as it progressed and through the years, like you realize this movie had a ton of staying power, and it's still on all of the greatest lists of movies of all time. But that was the textbook, summer movie, summer blockbuster, the thing that you would talk to your friends about, and everybody would go, pile into the car to the drive-in. So like, you can, there's a duality there. You can have movies that are both things. I mean, like a movie like Patton or Apocalypse Now, where there is action, there is like a ton of drama and stuff in it, but it's also a film in every sense of the word.
So to complement that, do you have maybe an example or two of your favorite movies?
Favorite movies, like just like stupid movies. I don't mean to say stupid, like to denigrate them.
No, but like that we would put into that category. So like The Matrix and things like that probably would fall into that category for you. That are your favorite movies versus your favorite films.
Yeah, I would say that, or like movies we talked about before, like Dodgeball, or I wanted to say Star Wars because that's like the first thing that I think of, like as far as like a movie goes. But that I almost feel like it doesn't give Star Wars its due, because I do think that those are canon in and of themselves, and like they should be regarded as film because they ushered in like this entire wave of movies for the next 50 years. Like we're still going to be talking about these movies. Star Wars is a good one. I would say something like Jurassic Park. I don't think Jurassic Park was incredibly like it's not like the script was amazing or the characters were super in depth or the acting was phenomenal, but for what it was just so groundbreaking, and it was like this awe-inspiring, attention-grabbing spectacle of a movie. You know what I mean? Like it was the perfect summer movie that people were talking about. I honestly think like Jaws, Jurassic Park, those kind of creature features, I think those are the perfect epitome of what a movie should be. I
agree with you. Okay, so Derek, I'm going to cycle back to you in a second. So just think about that. Some of your favorite films and favorite movies, and I'll give you mine since I kind of brought up this topic the other week. This is how I would do a distinction. So just to give you examples. For me, my favorite films are Citizen Kane, Battleship Potemkin, and The Grand Illusion. Those 3 are my favorite films of all time. My favorite movies of all time are Star Wars, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Jaws. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
That's perfect.
I think that's where I come from on this. But Derek, do you want to give some examples? Favorite films, favorite movies?
Yeah, I mean, we touched on a couple of minutes ago, so definitely Pulp Fiction certainly is near the top of my list for favorite films. Again, I sort of pulled from like the Oscar-nominated lists because I wanted to make sure we were getting ones people were talking about, and I tried to go for some of the less obvious ones. Boogie Nights, to me, is one of my all-time favorite films. I got to throw that on there. I had Schindler's List on my list, which Yancy just talked about. Unforgiven, Clint Eastwood, love it to death. Definitely would call that a film. And one of my, we'll call it a guilty pleasure film, is Good Will Hunting.
Interesting. So for me, so Yancy, you brought up something that I think is worth exploring a little bit more. You mentioned that a movie can be both. It can be a movie and a film. There's some examples, and I agree with you. I think there are some movies that kind of transcend into also being a film. An example for me would be Titanic. I think Titanic is an ultimate movie. Was the highest grossing film at the time, and to me, it's also a film because of the way that it's done. It's big, sprawling, epic, and Cameron really uses the medium to tell the story in just amazing ways. So for me, that's one. Derek, do you agree movies can be both a movie and a film?
Well, I definitely agree that there's room for sort of middle ground, and I would actually disagree with you on Titanic myself, and I actually have that squarely in the movie column for me, partly because
I agree.
I just don't feel that it has that staying power for the right reasons. It definitely was groundbreaking from a special effects point of view, from like an epic kind of standpoint, but I don't think it has the... Again, I want to say critical success, but I know it was nominated for awards, so you could argue it did have critical success. But to me, it's more of like that summer blockbuster popcorn kind of go to the movie, turn your brain off, enjoy it for 2.5 hours. Don't think about the deeper meaning. Just go and have fun with it. And so again, I got, Chris, some of the same ones as you. I have Star Wars, Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T., Jaws, Jurassic Park, Lord of the Rings. I argue potentially have some of that middle ground where there was enough of the positive stuff going for it to sort of, shift it towards a film. Many of the ones I just listed were nominated for Oscars. A couple of them were nominated for Best Picture even. But I don't know if I would classify them. If I had to pick one side or the other, I think all those ones would fall into the movie side, definitely more so than the film side.
Just to cycle back to Titanic for a second. For me, I've always sort of thought of Titanic as being the Gone with the Wind of our generation. So for that reason, I think that's why it's elevated too for me.
I see your point with that, Chris. I just don't when I watch Titanic. I've only seen it maybe 3 or 4 times. It's hard to watch it all in one sitting, as you guys know. It's long as hell. But it does feel. I see what you're talking about with the whole Gone with the Wind of our era kind of thing. But Gone with the Wind is miraculously timeless. You know what I mean? Obviously it's in the past, but when I watch Titanic, it feels incredibly aged to me. And one of my major criteria that I'm talking about for a film, the Titanic movie feels very 90s, and it feels very specific to that particular time, even though it was it was about something that happened in 1912. So these other films, though, whenever I watch them, like I said, they're so much more timeless. I'm not trying to rag on your pick, whatever. It was, like you said at the time, it was the #1 grossing film of all time. So it is a very, very good movie, but it is weird how we put these in boxes, how they can literally go either or depending on who you ask.
I think
I agree with you, Yancy. The Titanic to me feels dated, and which is funny for a period piece to feel dated. But yeah, when I watch it, I think 90s, and whether that's because I lived through the 90s and I've seen the movie probably 20 times or more, and I was at Blockbuster Video when the phenomenon of Titanic came out. But for me, that it just feels like a 90s movie, and for that, it's part of the reason that I'm not moving it more towards the film side.
Okay, so you just mentioned that you worked at Blockbuster Video, right? So did Blockbuster Video make this distinction? Was there films and movies, or from your experience working there, did you have a wall that was just film, or movies, or did that exist?
Good question, Chris.
Okay, so yes and no. There was certainly not 2 categories where they said films, except for foreign films. You always refer to them as foreign films.
Never hear them called foreign movies. Yeah, exactly. Never. Good point.
But you could easily tell the distinction between a movie and a film when you walked into a Blockbuster Video, because based on the number of copies. So Armageddon, which is a great action movie, emphasis on the movie part. And I think when it came out, my store had 100 copies. And around that same time, Boogie Nights came out, and I think my store had 6 copies. And both were great movies for what they were, but I would argue till the end of the show that Boogie Nights belongs in the film category and Armageddon belongs in the movie category. And you just look at the quantities that were available at the time, and that to me speaks volumes about which is which.
So another bit of a crossover between movies and films comes to mind, because back in the 70s, there was this influx of directors that they all went to film school. They didn't go to movie school, it was film school, right? And the thing is, it's so funny. If you would have asked any of those guys at the time, they all would have said, as soon as they came out of film school, they would have said, well, we want to make films, But funny enough, they went on to become the greatest movie makers in the history of cinema. I'm talking about guys like Lucas and Milius and Coppola and Scorsese too, although he went to film school in New York, right? The other guys were out in the West Coast. And then the funniest thing is, the greatest movie maker of all time, Spielberg, we've already mentioned him tonight. He never even went to film school. He applied to USC twice, but he was rejected both times. But all those guys, they all went to film school coming out. I'm going to make film. Nah, you guys end up making movies. It's just funny how that works.
Well, which is absolutely true. But at the same time, we'll use Spielberg again, one of my favorite directors. And I think we even said on a few episodes ago, arguably the greatest director currently making movies today. In 1993, he made 2. He made Jurassic Park and Schindler's List. And I would put Jurassic Park in the movie category and Schindler's List in the film category.
Yep.
Same guy, same year, checks off a lot of the same boxes for both movies. But I think, again, based on the criteria we're using, you could argue that that's a correct distinction. One is a movie, one is a film, yet same guy making both movies.
I think that's a really interesting distinction too, Derek. That really shows a director's ability and their range if they're able to do both. Steven Spielberg, like you just mentioned, in the same year, right? The same year he did 2 vastly different films. Or Christopher Nolan was able to do a Batman movie that was, wildly regarded as the best Batman movie ever made. But he's also able to do Inception and Dunkirk and, all these other films, Interstellar, which Chris absolutely hated, but, it's still it's still an amazing movie. But like, this could even be a future episode, like way down where like we can talk in depth about what makes a fantastic director. Is that they continuously make good films, or they're able to deviate and kind of play both sides of the aisle and make good movies that are for the general mass, or they can make, really esoteric films that are super specific but are critically acclaimed like that. That's a really interesting point. So
Yancy, you brought up a point a couple of minutes ago that I just want to cycle back to for a second, because I think it's interesting. Okay. You were mentioning about how sometimes the concept of time, as time goes on, a movie can be considered a film over time. So let's touch base on that. Do you think, are there any examples that you can think of that over time, this movie that comes out, ends up becoming a film? For me, the example that I would give is The Wizard of Oz, because I think it was definitely considered a movie when it came out, back in 39, but time has completely elevated that picture's status to film. I think anyway. So do you have any examples of movies that have become film over time? And Derek, think about that too. I'll ask you the same thing.
I mean, I can think of movies where at the time now they were really small hits, but I think as years go by, I think they'll become more of classics. Like really interesting stuff like, not interesting, what's the word I'm thinking of, but just like movies that I've mentioned when we did our favorite cult movies and stuff. Like, I don't know, a lot of the movies from like the early 2000s where they weren't commercial successes, I think in 15, 20 years, just like you guys mentioned with I just forgot the name of the word of the movie, but with past movies in the past, man, I'm drawing a blank. Somebody bail me out, but you don't know what I'm talking about. Anyways, every movie, there's always going to be movies that are overlooked for their time, whether it's by chance or happenstance, or that the fact that there are so many other movies that came out around that time that it's easy for one film to get overlooked. Like I've mentioned, like Ex Machina, Chris, another film that we reviewed on the show and you weren't particularly fond of. Like I firmly stand by that film, and like I do think that in 20, 30 years, that film is going to have legs, and it is going to be as revelatory today, it'll be just as much so in 30 years from now. They're going to be like, wow, that was really prescient. Like, think about 2001, where we're still talking about it and dissecting that film. And again, it goes back to the, do you see homages and do you see people referencing that in other forms of pop culture? Absolutely you do. You know what I mean? It is still every bit a part of like the pop culture zeitgeist now, even though it was made, I can't even do the math in my head, but 40, 50 years ago.
So that you've kind of touched base on a couple. I was wondering too, if there's any current movies, any current millennial films that you think will stand the test of time. There's a couple for me. I think in 2007, I'm a big fan of There Will Be Blood.
Oh yeah.
Oh man, I'm telling you that thing is that's unbelievable. And I mean, if we were to go down, sort of by decade, if you want to go back, we can go back to the 60s if you want. You mentioned 2001: A Space Odyssey. I think that's probably one of the best films to come out of the 60s. The 70s, The Godfather was already mentioned, I think. The 80s, I would say Raging Bull stands out to me and always has. Pulp Fiction, definitely. K-Band nailed it. That's out of the 90s, the best. There Will Be Blood for me is the one out of the 2000s. I don't know what's going to be out of the 2010s. I'm not
as
really
far
sure.
As like the 2000s go, like you could say movies like No Country for Old Men, another movie we reviewed that you didn't think was amazing, but like another movie that actually I'm going to give you tonight to watch, Chris. I'm not going to mention it. I'll save it for the end. But movies like The Departed or Inglourious Bastards or what's another good one? Or like There Will Be Blood. Like those are movies from that I grew up with. I was in high school when they came out, where they were critically acclaimed, but they weren't massive commercial successes. But I think 20, 30 years from now, we're still going to be watching those. An example of like a movie that was a commercial success. Think about like the Lord of the Rings movies, how big those were. You know what I mean? People are still going to be watching those movies, I believe, in 40 or 50 years. And someday they'll be canon and regarded as, not to the extent of like a Jaws, but they'll be like that long lasting franchise like a Star Wars would. I truly believe that.
So Derek, any movies over time that for you kind of elevated their status to a film?
Yeah, a few we've mentioned already. I would definitely agree. Yancy talked about Star Wars earlier. I think when Star Wars came out, it was every bit a movie. It was you could argue, the original blockbuster. It was the one people lined up around the corner to see. No doubt about it. When it came out, it was a movie. But I think over time, given the importance of that movie to movie making and pop culture and society, and so many things have grown out of that, you could very strongly argue that has become a film, the epitome of science fiction films. You're going to be a science fiction filmmaker. What do you look to? You look to 2001 and you look to Star Wars, I would definitely call that into question. The other another one that came to mind while you guys were, again, I had some movies written on my list here, so I just sort of making some notes next to them. Braveheart with Mel Gibson, for me, when it came out, was more of a movie. Didn't originally receive a huge amount of blockbuster success. I think it came out in like February, and then they re-released it in like the summer, towards the end of the summer. And then when Oscar Times came out, it got a lot more popular and it started to make a lot more money. To me, that was one that was probably more in the movie category first, but over time has gotten some legs, and I would probably classify it more towards the side of film. And to echo what Yancy said, I think a lot of the science fiction movies that we're seeing from the last 10 or 15 years that would probably still today be very much a movie could very easily move into the film side of it. So The Matrix is one for me that, I know Yancy loves The Matrix, and I got to say I'm probably right behind him as far as biggest fans of The Matrix. I can definitely see that one again. Think of how many times things like the bullet time scene has been emulated both comedically and like, in an honorary form. And just the message of the movie, the artificial reality versus reality, the man versus machine theme that we constantly see in today's science fiction. All of those to me are movies that could very easily, if they haven't already fallen over to that side of film, could easily be pushed there, given a little more time.
Well, what about this? What about if a movie gets lots of nominations or awards? Can it become a film that way? I think it might in the eyes of some. For me, it doesn't. I think a film is a film, regardless of whatever accolades are put upon it. And I think there's lots of examples of movies that have won, Best Picture that are in no way a quote-unquote film. Like, movies that come to mind for me are like American Beauty, even Driving Miss Daisy. I think Tom Jones, Chicago, movies like that. Like, they're just movies. Like, they're never going to become film. But
yep, I totally agree with that, Chris. And like oftentimes we put too much credit on Academy Awards and Golden Globe nominations and an actual award season, and we forget that those people in Hollywood that vote on these things, they are in their own little bubble too. You know what I mean? And it doesn't matter how many awards a movie wins. Like, it's not going to mean that the public grasps onto it and they continue watching it for the next 20 or 30 years. Like that's a really interesting point too, that I think that so much impetus is put on just exactly what critics think of a movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and really comes down to how subjective this whole distinction is, really, between a movie and a film. I think it's pretty subjective.
I have a question for you guys really quick.
Yeah,
Chris,
of course. No, go for it.
A lot of the movies and the films that we've referenced tonight, they're either very big franchises like Star Wars or The Godfather, or they're they're esoteric or they're documentary, like kind of in nature, or they're like almost like historical nonfiction, like Schindler's List. They're serious movies. They're well-produced movies. Can you think of any movies that are comedies? I know you guys are much bigger comedy fans than I am, but comedies that have been, put out in the last 30, 40, 50 years where you can see them becoming canon like that in pop culture, and they'll have that lasting, place in our psyche as being, we'll actually consider them films, and they'll stand the test of time. Can you think of anything like that, Derek?
You want to go to Derek first?
Yeah, you know what? I've been one of the questions. So I'm going to answer the question with a question, if you will. One of the things that I was going to bring up, if it didn't come up later, was: are there certain genres that are exclusive to one box or the other, or that are never or rarely going to straddle that categorization between film and movie? And comedy to me is one where I think it's going to squarely fall in the movie category 99 out of 100 times. And I think when you go to the film side, if you're looking for a comedy, it's going to be that witty comedy. You're going to get someone say, well, pretty much anything by Woody Allen. You're looking to Annie Hall, which isn't your typical ha-ha, laugh out loud, slap your knee, funny comedy. You're never going to hear someone say, that Johnny Knoxville in Jackass was really onto something. That is a film through and through. Like, not a chance. It's movies. It's the most basic form of comedy. It's people getting hit in the nuts. Like, that's a movie to me. You're never going to, no one's ever going to argue that one should be a film for any reason. But I still love it. But so no, I can't think of anything off the top of my head that in the comedy category that I would move to the film side. And I would argue that that's one of those genres that I think you're really looking for the exception rather than the norm to do that. You're going to get funny movies that fall into that category, but not a movie that is outright devised, written as a comedy.
I think that's interesting.
What do you think?
I think that's interesting. I have a different take on it. I think we usually tend to pigeonhole things, right? And it's easy to say dramas make the best sort of films. And, you guys are arguing to a degree that a comedy can't really be a film, but I disagree. So Modern Times from 1936 is a comedy, and it's also an incredible film. And you mentioned Woody Allen. I think some of his early work falls into the film category. You got to look at him. He was really, really heavily influenced by directors like Fellini and especially Bergman, right? And if you go back and watch Manhattan and Annie Hall, as you mentioned, I think you can make a very, very strong argument that those are films. And I think one of the best.
Sorry, Chris, let me cut you off for a second.
Mm-hmm.
So
yep.
I'm not saying that Woody Allen's movies aren't films. I agree with you 100%. I think almost everything Woody Allen's done would firmly fall in the film category. I always seem to have for me personally, I have a problem when people say, oh, this Woody Allen movie is a comedy. To me, I find most of his movies are dramas with humor in them. But I don't feel that classifying them as comedies, capital C comedies, is... personally, I don't feel it's correct.
That's fair. I think that's fair with maybe Manhattan, but to me, Annie Hall still is a comedy. I think it is. I've always thought of it as a comedy. I laughed throughout that movie. But I think the best example of a comedy that is a film is from 1968, and that's The Graduate. Because to me, that is a film. That is a film. Extreme to the nth degree. That's a film. What about other genres like animation? Is there an animated film that could be a film? Like, for me, I think Toy Story is a movie.
WALL-E.
I think Fantasia is a film.
The Lion King.
Yep.
Another comedy to cycle back. What about Some Like It Hot? I think that one counts.
Speaking about comedies real quick, and we can move on, but we talk about these films and how some of them are super intellectual and they're metaphorical and they're talking about bigger things in society and they're supposed to stand the test of time, be critically acclaimed, but one can argue that, those movies are incredibly nearsighted as far as they only appeal to a very small amount of people, right? And even if they're very, very intelligently made movies, they're only going to connect with a very small audience, which that's important and those films are important. But comedy doesn't get its due because for a movie that is designed to make people laugh, if it's able to literally entertain every walk of life, men, women, young, old, multiracial, multicultural, people all over the world, if it's able to make people laugh like that, doesn't that require some sort of level of genius in itself? And that's drastically underappreciated.
There's a movie from the early 80s. It's called My Favorite Year. I love this movie. And it's with Peter O'Toole. And Peter O'Toole has a great line in the movie where he says, dying is easy. Comedy is hard. And I agree that I think there's a great deal of skill that goes into some of the comedies. But for the most part, comedies are movies. They are. They're just by their inherent nature, right? But I just argue that I think some of them are kind of rise above it. That's all. And even if we look at horror, we've mentioned horror on this podcast many, many times. Something like from your generation, Yancy, Saw, the Saw franchise. To me, those are movies. But I think Night of the Living Dead, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, to me, those are films. Not just because they're old either. Just the themes in them and the way that they use the medium to tell the story. That's what I take it. And the thing is too, something else that's come up is, I think you can make films that are easily digestible by a mainstream audience. And case in point for me is Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock could do that. He made films, but for the most part, mainstream audiences sort of really connected with them.
Mm-hmm. Very simple films, but they were powerful.
Yeah. And the other thing too is that I think it's easy to kind of simplify things and say films are more visual in nature. They rely more on cinematography and interesting use of the camera, and framing and the use of shadows in black and white films, especially. But I think that if you thought of a film of just being those things, that would exclude movies that rely on a lot of acting and a lot of actors. And I don't think that's necessarily the case because there's a film from 1981. Cave, you've heard of this, I'm sure, but Yancy, you never heard of it. And it's called My Dinner with Andre. And to me, that's a film. And it takes place inside of a restaurant with Andre Gregory and Wallace Shawn just having dinner and talking the whole movie. And to me, that's a film.
Yeah, I would agree.
Don't you? Yeah. So, but it relies on the power of the actors. It's almost like watching a play, but it's just incredible.
So let me ask you a question here. A lot of the movies or films that we've talked about that sort of reach that film status are adaptations of well-known, well-received novels or well-known plays, and are often adapted from other sources. And that's the whole reason they were put onto the big screen is, hey, this was a book that was great. Let's turn it into a movie. This was a play that, won a Tony Award. Let's turn it into a movie. Mm-hmm. To me, that's almost like giving those movies or films for the most part, a leg up in that if they've got this really strong story before they even begin, if you come to me and say, hey, I've got this Pulitzer Prize winning novel and we want to turn it into a movie, it's like, you're already halfway to being that film status based on, again, some of the categories that we've talked about. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not to say that you're not going to screw it up, because how many times have we heard, best-selling...
Exactly. The bonfire of the vanities.
Best-selling author.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then you're like, oh, okay, you got who to play what role? Like, come on, who had pictures of who to get that guy in that movie? Like, seriously.
I mean, a good example is like The Great Gatsby, and they cannot put that on film. They just haven't been able to do it because of the casting and things like that. It just doesn't fit.
Exactly.
So one last question I have, and then we'll have some fun together. So is one better than the other? Yancy, start with you.
Man, it's hard. For me personally, I prefer films, right? I think that's kind of been established as we do these movie reviews back and forth. I prefer one over the other, but if I were just watching quote unquote films every single day, I think I would kind of get tired of it. It's nice to mix it up. Like, you need that flavor, that zest of a, almost like a mindless movie, like a really, action packed, fun movie full of explosions and fire and, actors that are well known and, maybe do one thing, or character actors. There's a place definitely for both of them. I personally skewed more towards the film side, but I don't think it's fair to say that one's better than the other.
Derek, what are your thoughts? Is a movie better than a film better than a movie?
No, I'm pretty much going to echo what Yancy said. I think each has its place and each has its own audience. And I don't think that the people that want to see a film are going to go to see a movie expecting a film. I think that the film going audience is going to sort of know what to look for. They're going to read reviews. They're going to see a trailer. They're going to get a sense right away of, this is trying to be a film. I'm going to go see it. And I think people that want a movie are going to go, hey, look at that. Explosions and nudity. I'm there. And away they go, right? Like, I think the audience that wants each of those two kinds of movies is going to get exactly what they expect most of the time, with very few exceptions. I don't necessarily think one is better than the other. But like Yancy, I think, I would rather sit and see a film as if I go to the Toronto Film Festival in my peak when I was much younger and I had a lot more time, I was seeing upwards of 50 movies over the course of 10 days. And 48 out of those 50 were films through and through. Mm-hmm. But you always had a couple of those big releases where they're like, hey, we're going to, show this big Hollywood movie to try and bring some money to the festival. And you go to that one knowing exactly what to expect. You're going to get your summer blockbuster kind of movie with, again, I'm going to keep going back to explosions. To me, nothing says movie more than an explosion. Michael Bay is never going to be called a film director.
No, he won't.
Perfect. Yeah. That is the perfect point. Yes.
Yeah. I don't think that there is I don't think one is better than the other. I think they each have their place, and I think they're both good for what they're good at.
Yeah, I agree. You guys hit it on the head, because they serve different purposes, right? Like, not to oversimplify things, but as we've said, just sort of as a conclusion to this segment, a movie is there to entertain, but for me, a film is an art form. So that's where I would leave things at. Okay, you guys ready to have some
fun with Yancy?
Okay, so I tell you what, you guys can both play along this week, because we have both of you here. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I decided to kind of dip into the millennial pool a little bit in terms of the tool that I would use. So I went to the IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, and what I did was I'm going to make things easy for you. Yancy, you're obviously familiar with IMDb. You use it all the time. If you go in there and take a look at any films that are listed there, they will list a little synopsis, usually just like one or two sentences, right? So I'll tell you what, here's what I'm going to do. These are what I would consider to be films, okay? And I'm going to give you the film synopsis right out of IMDb. All you need to do, name the film. You guys can handle this, right?
I like it, yes.
Okay, so we'll start with some easy ones, okay? You guys ready?
Yep.
Okay, a Phoenix secretary embezzles $40,000 from her employer's client, goes on the run, and checks into a remote hotel run by a young man under the domination of his mother.
Psycho.
Okay, a
Derek
mentally
didn't give me a chance.
Sorry, Yancy. I was pausing, and then I'm like,
and he just jumped in. Yeah. Okay. So next one, a mentally unstable Vietnam War veteran works at night in New York City, where the perceived decadence and sleaze feeds his urge for violent action, while attempting to save a pre-adolescent prostitute in the process.
Taxi driver.
Oh, yay! Well done.
I didn't have any idea what it was until your very last part about the young girl, and I'm
Right.
like, okay, it's got to be Taxi Driver.
Weirdly enough, I've never seen that movie.
Oh wow, you guessed it. Oh, I got to put that down because I got to give that to you as one of the movies you got to watch.
I got to be honest, I saw it once and I didn't care for it.
Oh man, I love that movie. Oh man, I love it. And I just called it a movie. It's a film. Okay, next. During the Vietnam War, Captain Willard is sent on a dangerous mission into Cambodia to assassinate a renegade colonel who has set himself up as a god among a local tribe.
I know this one. You know it, Derek?
Yeah, I know it.
Go ahead.
Apocalypse Now.
That's right. It is. It's Apocalypse Now. Okay.
Doing good.
A manipulative woman. I told you these would be easy, right? A manipulative woman and a roguish man conduct a turbulent romance during the American Civil War and Reconstruction periods.
I have no idea.
The Civil War?
Yep. A manipulative woman, probably the most manipulative woman who's ever been on film, and a roguish man who doesn't give a damn conduct a turbulent romance during the American Civil War and Reconstruction periods.
No idea.
1930,
I think because you said I
1939.
don't give a damn, that gives it up a little bit. But I can't remember the name of the movie.
Gone with the Wind?
Gone with the Wind is correct. That's
There we
right.
go. Right,
Okay,
my
this
favorite.
this one's for Yancy. Okay, and it's an old movie too. It's from the 50s.
Okay.
But this one's for Yancy. A silent film production company and cast make a difficult transition to sound.
I know. This is one of my favorite movies.
It's one of
I don't
Yancy's
know.
favorite.
I don't know. Go for it, Derek.
Is it Singing in the Rain?
Of course, it's Singing in the Rain. Jeez, Yancy,
I've seen that movie too.
I know
my first girlfriend ever. That was her very favorite movie, and she made me watch it with her. And I was like, "Oh my god, I hate musicals," but I really enjoyed it.
Okay, so this next one's a tough one. I'm going to give you a little bit of a hint. It's a foreign film. It's one of my top 5 favorite films of all time. Okay, hypnotist Dr. Caligari uses a somnambulist, Cesar, to commit murders.
No idea.
No idea.
Derek, come on. We've almost swept. Come on, Derek.
1920.
I mean, I could hazard a guess just because Chris already told us what his all-time 3 favorite films were, and I think it might have been one of the ones he mentioned.
No, it's not. It's not.
Okay, I have no idea. Can you read me the clue again?
It's right in the clue. Hypnotist Dr. Caligari uses a somnambulist, Cesar, to commit murders.
I'm going to say The Hypnotist.
No, it's the cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Oh, yeah, geez, never would I was going to say Manchurian Candidate.
No, it's one of my favorite films of all time. I love it. Oh, I love that film. It's great. Okay, so here's one. And I think I want to throw this one to Yancy. It's an old one again from the 50s, but I think Yancy can get this one, okay? A San Francisco detective suffering from acrophobia investigates the strange activities of an old friend's wife, all the while becoming dangerously obsessed with her.
Is this Vertigo?
It is very
Yes.
well done.
I was just going to
Nice.
say, I think I know this one, but you got it.
And my last one, I will throw it to you, is a millennial film. Okay, so I can't make it too easy. A little bit hard, but I don't know. It's a great film. A young Chinese warrior steals a sword from a famed swordsman and then escapes into a world of romantic adventure with a mysterious man in the frontier of the nation.
Derek?
No idea. Doesn't even
The Last
sound familiar.
Samurai.
No, it's from 2000.
Say it again. Say it one more time.
A young Chinese warrior steals a sword from a famed swordsman and then escapes into a world of romantic adventure with a mysterious man in the frontier of the nation.
Was it Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon?
Very good, Yancy.
There we go.
Yes, it
You did pretty
is.
good, Derek.
Not
You did
too
pretty-
bad. Not too bad at all.
So, Chris, can I throw one to you?
Of course you can. Of course
All
you
right,
can.
so let me build this up a little more than it needs to be built up. When we used to work at Blockbuster Video, we didn't have the IMDb because this was pre-internet when you
Right.
had like video cassettes. And what we had was the TV Guide. This was the literal TV Guide magazine that you bought off the shelf every week so you knew what was going to be on TV that week.
Right, yeah.
And real people got paid real money to describe television shows and movies in one sentence.
Oh my goodness.
Into the TV guide.
Very cool.
And so when we were at Blockbuster, it used to be funny as we would take the TV guide, someone would bring it in every week, or they'd probably bring in the one from the week before when their mom was done with it, and they would read us the one-sentence descriptions, and we'd have to try and guess what movie that was describing. So our favorite that we constantly went back to, whenever we get new employees come in, and we're like, I've seen everything. We're like, okay, I'm going to give you a one-sentence description. Tell me which movie this is. So this is our favorite one.
Good.
You both can jump in on this one. Good luck, Yancy. 4 Atlanta businessmen go on a bad canoe trip.
Deliverance.
Bingo.
Yes. Not bad, eh? Yep. Oh, that's all right. Too bad. Next time we'll have to get into some Canadian film too. We didn't do that this time, but hopefully we kind of got to talking to some of the ideas of movies and films. Like I say, it's just something that just came up on a previous podcast. We decided to kind of flesh it out a little bit. It was really good. Derek, thanks, as always, for joining us on the show. And thanks for filling in when Yancy was indisposed there. That was really, really great of you to step up. So we really appreciate it.
Happy to do it. Thanks for having me. But I'm very glad Yancy's back, and I've enjoyed the shows you guys have done. Last week's show on the Killing Fields was great. It's, again, one of my favorite movies too, Chris. So I was glad to hear it get some love. And definitely that one falls in the film category.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. That was a good one. And Yancy, thanks a lot. Like as Derek mentioned, just echo his thoughts. It's great to have you back, my friend.
Likewise.
Yeah, it's always good to have you back. So we will be back next week. Before we leave, now we're going to go back to one of the other formats that we have on the show where we give each other movies to watch. So last time, obviously, Derek mentioned it. I made you watch The Killing Fields, which you really liked. It's great movie. So now it's your turn. You got to throw a movie at me that I've got to watch before next week, and we'll come back and we'll break the movie down and we'll discuss it. So what's the film that you would like me to watch, or is it a movie?
I think I would consider this a film. I think you'll say that it's probably a crappy movie, just judging by how things normally go.
Get off my lawn, you kids!
We're going to watch one of the first movies I ever saw by myself in a theater. I went and saw this as a junior in high school. It is the 2006 dystopian thriller Children of Men.
Oh, so good.
Okay. Very, very good.
Chris, have you seen this movie?
I have not seen this movie.
Oh, if you don't like this movie, I may have to stop listening to the podcast for a while. Yancy's giving you some great picks that you have disliked, and I just don't understand how you didn't like District 9. How you didn't like it.
I did like District 9.
I like Interstellar.
I thought District 9 was great. Go back and listen to that podcast. I thought it was awesome. I thought some of the what was going on thematically in that movie was great. I actually liked District 9. I thought it was really good. Interstellar, I didn't like that movie. That movie, man, that's 3 hours of my life I'll never get back.
He's still mad about it, Derek. Can you tell?
No, I just
I'm
didn't
mad
like it.
He's mad.
I
don't get he didn't like some of these movies. But
I know, and me being like this film guy that I just love this stuff. But no, I did not like Interstellar, and I've got some hate mail as a result of it. Just so you know. But people are like, you suck. But yeah, whatever. I don't like it. I'm just being honest. Okay, so for next week, I will definitely watch Children of Men, and we'll come back. We'll talk about it. It'll be great. Until then, as I mentioned at the top of the show, if you want to reach us on Twitter, you can get us at C. McBrien or at Yancy Eaton. Derek is always available on Twitter at Amaron_DM. You can go over to popgoesyourworld.com. All our contact information is there. Wherever you download and listen to the show, just take a minute, leave us a review. We'd really, really appreciate it, and I'd love to get that feedback as always. Until next time, this is Chris McBrien for Yancy Eaton saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thank you for listening to the Pop Goes Your World podcast. Continue the conversation on Twitter at C. McBrien or at Yancy Eaton. Please consider leaving a review for the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.